Hi everyone, my name is Paul De Cinque and I'm a faculty member at the University of Western Australia's Conservatorium of Music. This video is the second of two about transposing instruments and will help you understand how to transpose for all the instruments in the ATAR syllabus. If you haven't watched the first video on transposing instruments, I suggest you begin there. It is linked below in the video description. But here is a quick recap of video 1. Remember that for all transposing instruments, the pitch written on the page is not the same as the pitch that sounds. The way to know the sounding pitch is the key of the instrument. So for a B flat instrument, a written C sounds a B flat. Remember that your eyes are higher than your ears. And apart from the piccolo and the E flat clarinet, the written pitch is higher than the sounding pitch. Also remember, we discussed our transposition intervals. For B flat instruments, the transposing interval is a major second. For A instruments, the transposing interval is a minor third. For F instruments, the transposing interval is a perfect fifth. And finally, for E flat instruments, the transposing interval is a major sixth. So that's a brief recap of what we covered in video 1. Now let's cover our low saxophones and clarinet. The bass clarinet and tenor saxophone are B-flat instruments, so you would probably assume that they should have a transposition interval of a major second. Well, their transposition interval is actually an octave plus a major second. That means for a sounding middle C, the bass clarinet and tenor saxophone players will have a written D on the fourth line of the treble clef. Now you probably noticed on the screen that the sounding pitch is shown in bass and treble clef, but the written pitch is shown only in treble clef. That's because bass clarinet and tenor saxophone players read their music in treble clef all the time. So remember, your written pitch for these two instruments must be in treble clef, and the sounding pitch can be in either bass or treble clef, whichever looks better and uses less ledger lines. Now, we will learn about the E-flat baritone saxophone. This works in a similar way to the tenor saxophone. The baritone saxophone's transposition interval is an octave plus a major sixth. That's because it's an E-flat instrument. And its written pitch is also always in the treble clef. So here you can see middle C, for the baritone saxophone being the sounding pitch, is actually going to sound an A above the treble clef stave. So look at this melody. It's the written part for a B-flat tenor saxophone or a B-flat bass clarinet. You are asked to notate the sounding pitch. Remember, your eyes are higher than your ears. The written pitch is higher than the sounding pitch. So we want to transpose this down to the sounding pitch using our transposition interval, which for these larger B-flat instruments is an octave plus a major second. So the written melody FGA that you see here on the screen will sound E-flat FG, an octave and a second below it. Notice how I wrote the sounding pitch in bass clef? It was easier than writing lots of ledger lines in treble clef. However, it would have been correct to show the sounding pitch in either clef. Now it's your turn. Here is the sounding pitch. What would be the written pitch for an E-flat baritone saxophone? Remember, will you go up or down? Is the question asking you to go from sounding up to written or written down to sounding? Also, what will be your transposition interval? Pause the video and write down your answer before I go through the process. So, your eyes are higher than your ears. The written pitch is higher than the sounding pitch. So we want to transpose this up to the written pitch using our transposition interval, which for baritone saxophone is an octave and a major sixth. So the melody, D, E, F sharp, will become B, C sharp, D sharp. Hopefully, you remember to write this one in treble clef. Even if you wrote it like this in bass clef, you would be marked incorrectly as the written pitch needs to be in treble clef. Okay, so we also need to learn about the double bass and the contrabassoon. These instruments play very low notes and would often need to read many ledger lines below the bass clef. So, to make it easier for these players, double bass and contrabassoon players see a written pitch higher than the sounding pitch by 1 octave. The piccolo is the opposite of this. The piccolo plays very high notes and would often need to read many ledger lines above the treble clef. So for piccolo players, their written pitch is lower than the sounding pitch by 1 octave. Now that's the opposite of everything we have learned so far. Remember, this is one of our 2 exception instruments where what we see higher than what we hear is the opposite now. It's like turning our face around. Finally, you may need to know about the E-flat clarinet for your set works. This is the other exception instrument where the written pitch is lower than the sounding pitch. For this one, the written pitch is a minor third lower than the sounding pitch. You can think about this as being the opposite of the alto saxophone transposition you have learned in the previous video. Now for these last few instruments, your teacher will be able to help you further with some more examples in class because they're a little bit tricky. Thanks for watching this video today. You can keep playing your instrument at UWA in one of our many ensembles and get credit towards any undergraduate degree. We have orchestras, bands, jazz groups, choirs, and a host of other smaller groups you can participate in. Check out our broadening unit list in the video description below, and good luck for your ATAR Music Studies this year.